It didn't scream. It sighed.
Don't want to wake up tomorrow. Not a storm, just a shadow of sorrow. It came so soft, so strangely still. Not a cry for help, not a cry at all.
Thought was driftwood on a tide. Not chased, not welcome, just inside. And once it came, it didn't leave. It lingered quiet beneath the weed. Tea, the thought that starts it slow. Headspace where you barely know. Our recurrence night and day. The escalation finding ways. The ambivalence that slips. The direction with fingertips. This is straight, not yet a plan, but the thread is pulling where it began. She walked past bridges a little slow. Wondered how far she'd need to go. Her thoughts like gravity, you looped and spun. Not final, but focused on undone.
The smell of rain, her sister's laugh, held her for moments, pulled her back. But moments fade and thoughts return, and comfort flickers but doesn't burn.
It's not obsession, it's orbiting pain around a star with no real name. Not always loud, but always near. Like a whisper threading through each fear. Ask her gently, what does this thread hold? What story lies beneath its fold? What still pulls toward the light? What once gave darkness all its might? Tea, the thought that touched the door. The headspace pulled from before. Our loops in silent prairie, the edges drawn with care. A, the life that still resists. D, the draft that now exists. This is straight, not yet the fall, but it's the shape that starts it all. The thread came loose, not with rage but ache, not with noise but weight and still. It can be traced if we sit still enough and see what's pulling underneath.
Good day, everyone. This is Manan, and welcome back to the Protect podcast, where we are exploring Steps for Hope, the fourth book in the 4-volume series called Steps. Actually, a lot of the content in the first 8-episode sequence does relate to Steps 1 rather than Steps 4. The volumes, as you would expect, are interlinked. Whichever volume it may be, we are here to explore the hard conversations, the ones that stitch pain to meaning and meaning to life. And I'm so glad you're here again, whether you've been following Ari's journey with us, or this is your first time listening in, or you have been reading the books. In this episode, we enter the second step of the STEPS framework, ideation or thread. This is the phase that suicidal ideation begins to emerge and begins to take root. Last time, we explored the very beginning of risk, fabric, where emotional pain starts to wear through a person's self-image, relationships, and sense of hope. We walked alongside Ari as her inner world began to fray, her confidence dimmed, connections loosened, and despair crept in. We named those threads of fragility, alienation, burdensomeness, rumination, entrapment, and the quiet curtain of despair. It was a phase of vulnerability, not yet a crisis, but one where something essential was being lost. Today, we follow what happens next when a single strand loosens from that weakened fabric. And when a new thought begins to form, maybe I don't want to be here anymore. So, in thread, the thread is pulled, and we are tracing ideation from murmur to meaning. There's a moment, often missed, often misread, where pain begins to whisper in a different tone. It doesn't arrive shouting, it doesn't always speak of death. It often sounds more like exhaustion, a quiet wondering, a thought half formed. What if it just stopped? This is the first shift, and this is why we need to trace the thread, because at this stage, risk is still woven into life. The person is still reaching, still responsive, still holding the thread in their hands. But something inside has begun to fray. Thread is not an interrogation, it is an invitation. Not are you suicidal, but can we trace what you have been carrying? It allows us to meet people before they reach the point of rupture. Each letter, T, H, R, E, A, D, is a point of attunement, a way to gently follow the strand of suicidal ideation as it loops between overwhelm, resistance, and potential planning. This is where relational presence matters most. Not to pull the thread tight, but to hold it with them and listen for what it might lead. So, T, thoughts of suicide. The first flicker. It often hides in casual words. I just don't want to be here. I wish I could disappear. I wouldn't mind if I didn't wake up tomorrow. These are not declarations of intent. They are reflections of emotional pain. They signal that something inside is aching to stop. Not necessarily to die, but to pause. Now, you can use motivational interviewing informed prompts like, when life gets heavy, it's not unusual to wonder what it might feel like to stop. Have any thoughts like that been coming up for you lately? Or has there ever been a moment where you wished you could just sleep and not have to wake up to this pain you have got? What would you say is hurting most right now? The part you wish would go away. So again, I framed some closed questions. Remember, closed questions are answered in a yes or a no, and then I used the open question. And open the door gently. Don't ask, are you suicidal? As the first question. Ask if life has felt like too much. If stopping has felt like relief, or the thought of stopping has felt like relief. You're not diagnosing, you are de-shaming. Next letter, H, Headspace of Suicidality. What does it feel like inside when the thoughts arrive? That's what you're trying to get at. Is it fog, chaos, numbness, static, a low hum of despair? Understanding the emotional terrain of suicidal ideation matters. It helps distinguish chronic distress from acute crisis, and it validates the person's internal experience. So, relational prompts could be like, when those thoughts show up, what's the overall feeling? Numb, panicky, heavy, loud? Do they sneak up on you or feel like they've always been there in the background? Now, here's a complex question. What metaphor would best describe your mind when those thoughts come? Storm, silence, prison, tunnel, maybe something else. Metaphors help when language falters. Offer imagery. Give permission to describe what often feels indescribable. Be curious, not clinical. Next letter, R, recurrence and distractibility. Does the thread return? Can it be put down? Do these thoughts come in waves or do they cling? Is the person able to redirect their attention or are they stuck inside the loop? So you will see these repeating patterns. We had repetitive ruminations in fabric, and in thread, we are talking about recurrence and distractibility. And that is inevitable because although we are talking of these in steps as if these steps are separate, no, they all overlap. And it is a sequence, and people fluctuate in them as well. So this deliberate repetition has been planned in a way so that we don't miss out specific aspects. Now, you can use explanatory questions like, when those thoughts come, how long do they stay? Are there things that help you shift focus, like being with someone, moving your body, or watching a show? Or do they kind of stick around even when you try to do something else? So, this step tells us about emotional flexibility. When distractions fail, the person may feel trapped. Gently reflect this. Sounds like these thoughts really put you in even when you try to break free. That sounds exhausting. And the tone in which you speak is really important. Make that effort to connect. The next letter, E, escalation in specificity. When the thread begins to take form, there is a difference between I want to stop hurting and I have started imagining how. This is not always linear. Some people think in detail from the start. Others never form a concrete plan. What matters is not the presence of detail, but the movement toward it. So here we want gentle exploration. Have the thoughts stayed kind of vague, or have they started to take on a bit more shape, like an image, a time, or a method? Even if you haven't planned anything, have you noticed your mind in lingering on certain ideas or ways out? When you imagine things getting too hard, what kind of picture comes to mind? So don't press, hold the possibility with steady hands. If the person pulls back, don't pursue, pivot instead. I want to honor your pace. You don't need to tell me everything, just what feels okay to share. Next letter, A, ability and desire to resist. Both are important. The quiet strength that remains. This is what you're exploring here. So here we ask, what keeps the thread from snapping? Not out of pressure, but to remind them it exists. Here you can use some affirming questions. So when things feel unbearable, what helps you hold on, even just a little longer? The phrasing of the questions is very important. You are not imposing hope, but you are trying to elicit it gently, softly. Has there ever been a moment where you almost acted but didn't? I would really like to understand what stopped you. Is there anyone or anything in your life that makes the idea of staying even slightly more bearable? Affirm gently. You can say something like, that's not nothing. Even the tiniest thread of resistance is worth naming. It means something in you still wants life, even when it doesn't feel like it. Explore without pressure. You are gathering threads of hope, not trying to not too soon. Next letter, D, direction toward planning. Has the thread started pointing toward action? It's like this thread's becoming pointy and it's going for the eye of the needle, which is the next step, intention. So this is where ideation can begin to cross into preparation. Even small steps like researching, setting a date, or rehearsing scenarios carry important weight. And it's great for MI style exploration here. So has your mind started moving towards when or how? Or you can preface it a bit. Sometimes people find themselves Googling things, writing notes, or imagining scenarios, not because they have decided, but because they're trying to prepare. Has anything like that been happening for you? Has there been a moment recently where it felt like the idea was getting a bit closer to action? So approach this not with urgency, but with steadiness. If yes, this is not panic time, it's pause time. Ground the conversation, reaffirm safety, offer containment, not escalation. So it's important to reiterate why we trace the thread. Because suicide doesn't always start with a scream. Sometimes it starts with silence. People don't always say, I want to die. They say, I'm tired. I just wanted to stop. I can't keep going like this. Thread helps us catch the quiet. It's a map for early attunement where presence and permission can change the trajectory of pain. It tells the person, you don't have to be in crisis for me to care. I see that the thread is shifting, and I want to understand before it becomes a knot too tight to hold. It gives us language that is compassionate, not clinical, attuned, not accusatory, brave, not brash. Because the truth is, we can't always stop the pain, but we can trace it, name it, stay beside it. And sometimes that's the thread that holds. Let's return to Ari. The first time it happened, she was brushing her teeth. It was late. She was tired. The house was quiet. And the thought slipped in, unannounced. I don't want to wake up tomorrow. No panic, no plan, just a moment of surrender. A sigh, not a scream. That was the first tug, the first sign of what we call T, thoughts of suicide. A few days later, after a lonely afternoon, scrolling through messages that hadn't come, another thought arrived. Would it matter if I were gone? She didn't say it loud, didn't even write it down, but it stayed with her, just behind her eyes. Inside, her headspace began to shift. That's H, Headspace of Suicidality. Some days, she whispered she could just dissolve, fade into quiet. Other days, she longed for someone to notice, to reach for her, to see what she couldn't say. She moved between numbness and ache, between wanting someone to pull her back and wondering if it was already too late. At first, she could still shrug the thoughts off, put on a playlist, take a walk, watch an old comfort show. But slowly, the thoughts began to stick. That's R, recurrence and distractibility. The ideas crept in during quiet moments, before sleep, in the shower. She'd catch herself thinking, why does this keep coming back? But there was no clear answer, only repetition. And then something changed. The what if started becoming how, not in vivid detail, but in shape, in outline. She began to linger on certain ideas, a moment here, a method there. Her mind, once scattered, started orbiting a darker center. This was E, escalation in specificity. Still, not everything was lost. Some days, her sister's voice could still reach her. Sometimes it was the scent of a eucalyptus on a damp morning. Sometimes it was an unfinished novel. Small things, beautiful things, things that pulled her back, even for a moment. But they were fragile. Some days she gripped them tightly. Other days they slipped from her hands. This is A, ability and desire to resist. And then came the sketching. Not a plan, not yet, but a noticing. She began to pay attention to when the house was quietest. She thought about who might find her and when. She imagined how she might explain it in a letter she never wrote. The thread was no longer loose. It had direction. That's D, direction toward planning. This is thread. This is ideation. It doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it settles in slowly until it's wrapped itself through everything. From the outside, nothing may look different, but inside, the inner weave is shifting. So, what do we do when the thread starts to move? We trace it, we honor it, we ask, where is this thread pointing? What is it made of? What still tethers it to life? Because suicidal ideation is not proof that nothing matters. It is proof that something once mattered deeply and that it may be slipping away. And our task is to notice, not to panic, not to pull, but to sit beside the person and say, I see the thread. I'm here to hold it with you. Next time, we will enter the needle phase, when the thread begins to sharpen into intention. But for now, let's pause here with Ari at the edge of ideation. Here's a song to close our time together today, a song woven from Ari's thoughts and the quiet tension of the thread phase.
It didn't scream, it sighed. It wasn't planned, it just arrived. I don't wanna wake up tomorrow. Not a storm, just a shadow of sorrow. It came so soft, so strangely still. Not a cry for help, not a cry at all. The thought was driftwood on a tide, not chased, not welcomed, just inside. And once it came, it didn't leave. It lingered quiet beneath the weed. The thought that starts its slow age, the headspace where you barely know. R, the recurrence, night and day. E, the escalation, finding ways. A, the ambivalence that slips. D, the direction with fingertips. This is straight, not yet a plan, but the thread is pulling where it began. She walked past bridges, a little slow, wondered how far she'd need to go. Her thoughts like gravity, looped and spun, not final, but focused on undone. The smell of rain, her sister's laugh held her for moments, pulled her back, but moments fade and thoughts return. And comfort flickers but doesn't burn. It's not obsession, it's orbiting pain around a star with no real name. Not always loud, but always near, like a whisper threading through each fear. Ask her gently, what does this thread hold? What story lies beneath its fold? What still pulls toward the light? What once gave darkness all its might? To the thought that touched the door, H, the headspace pulled from before. R, it loops in silent prayer. E, the edges drawn with care. A, the life that still resists. D, the draft that now exists. This is straight, not yet the fall, but it's the shape that starts it all. The thread came loose, not with rage, but ache. Not with noise, but weight. And still it can be traced if we sit still enough and see what's pulling underneath.